Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Zaslansky. I'm the founder of the book Fairies. As we work to promote our Readathon fundraiser, we are grateful for all of the talented authors and celebrities who have donated their time and talent to help us raise money and awareness for our mission. We wouldn't exist without our donors and sponsors, and if you like our mission of supplying books to kids who are most in need, especially during this time of COVID, we hope that you will consider a donation today. Now, I'm excited to introduce everybody to our favorite friend and author, Nancy Krulik. So the Book Fairies has a nice relationship with Nancy in that she helped us celebrate our millionth book donation over a year ago. So we're excited to welcome her back. Nancy is the author of more than 200 books for children and young adults, including 3 New York Times bestsellers. She is best known, however, for being an author and creator of, get this, Katie Kazoo Switcheroo, George Brown Class Clown, How I Survived Middle School, Magic Bones series, and what the book that she is going to be reading today, which is going to be
Princess Pulverizer, Grilled Cheese and Dragons.
So this is her newest series that is coming out right now, is Princess Pulverizer, who we adore. Nancy currently lives in Manhattan with her husband and composer, Daniel, and their 2 children, Amanda and Ian, as well as their favorite wacky beagle mix named Josie. Thank you for your time today, and welcome, Nancy. I'm going to let you take it away and tell us all about Princess Pulverizer.
So hi! Happy summer. I hope you've all been reading, because I know I have. I've also been writing. I thought I'd start everything off today with reading to you from my new series, which is Princess Pulverizer. This is book 1, Grilled Cheese and Dragons, and it starts out like this. Princess Serena, Lady Frump shouted angrily. Come down from there right now. Princesses do not hang from the ceiling. But the royal princess of Imperia was not ready to come down. She didn't want to sit at the table with her classmates, learning about the proper manners or how to use a tea party. Who cared whether you held your pinky up while you picked up your teacup? Tea parties were no fun at all. But swinging from the rafters, now that was fun. The princess began swaying back and forth over the heads of the other girls in her class. Back and forth. Back and forth, back and forth. She swung her legs higher and higher in the air. Whee! The princess shouted down to her classmates. You guys should try this. It's amazing. I feel like I'm flying. The girls stared at her in surprise. No one disobeyed Lady Frump, ever. She was the toughest, scariest teacher at the Royal School of Ladylike Manners. But Lady Frump didn't frighten the princess at all. Nobody frightened her. She was the bravest girl in all of Imperia, maybe even in the whole world. And so she kept on swinging, back and forth, back and whoa! The princess let out a loud yelp as she lost her grip on the rafters. Splash! The princess's royal bottom landed right in a big bowl of ooey-gooey purplish pomegranate pudding. Smash! Spoons, forks, knives, teacups, and saucers crashed to the floor. There was broken china everywhere. The princess looked up at Lady Frump. The teacher's eyes were beet red. Her face was tightened into an angry grin, and she was clutching her handkerchief in a sweaty fist. Oops! The princess said sheepishly. Now look what you've done, Lady Frump scolded. Why didn't you come down carefully when I asked you to, Princess Serena? Well, for one thing, that's not my name, the princess replied. I've told you that 1,000,000 times. A few of the girls gasped. Serena is the name your father, King Alexander, gave you, Lady Frump reminded her. But it's not the right name for me, the princess explained. Serena comes from the word serene. Serene means calm and peaceful. I'm neither of those. Lady Frump couldn't argue with that. Nobody could argue with that. That's why I gave myself a new name, the princess continued. From now on, I want everyone to call me Princess Pulverizer. Princess Pulverizer is not a proper name for a royal girl, Lady Frump told her. Says who? Princess Pulverizer argued. Well, Lady Frump stammered. The girls all stared at Princess Pulverizer in awe. She'd stumped Lady Frump. Amazing. Never mind, Lady Frump said, wiping her forehead with her handkerchief. I will have 2 of the scullions from the kitchen come and clean up the mess later. And you, Princess Serena, will help them. Princess Pulverizer gasped with surprise. She wasn't sure which was more shocking. The idea that her teacher would expect her to clean up the mess with the kitchen maids, or that she refused to call her by her new name. In the meantime, we will head into the ballroom to practice dancing the saltarello, Lady Frump continued. I want all of you to be able to dance beautifully at the ball next month. Princess Pulverizer frowned as she followed her classmates into the ballroom. The only thing worse than a tea party lesson was a dance lesson. Princess Pulverizer was not a great dancer. She wasn't even a good dancer. Actually, she was a lousy dancer. And to make matters worse, the ballroom was right above the courtyard where the boys in night school did their training. The boys looked like they were having so much fun riding on their horses and having sword fights. And here she was, stuck moving her feet to the same beat over and over again. Tip, tap, hop, tap, tap, hop, Lady Frump repeated as she clapped her hands. Ladies, please dance to the rhythm. Princess Pulverizer looked out the window and watched as 2 of the knights in training drew swords. They began fencing, poking each other's army with their weapons. Clong, clong. Every time one of the swords hit their metal suits, it made a loud noise that echoed all the way up to the ballroom. Clip, clop, clip, clop. 3 other boys rode by on horseback, and all of them, even the horses, were dressed in armor. Princess Pulverizer scowled. It wasn't fair. Why did the boys get to wear full suits of armor and ride on horses, while she was stuck trying to hop around on a dance floor in a silly lace gown? And why did the boys get to wear those valiant visors when they fenced, while she was stuck having to balance a tiara on her head as she danced the saltarello? A visor had a purpose. It kept the knight safe. What was the point of a tiara? Tap, tap, hop, tip, tip, hop, Lady Frump continued. Girls, please pay attention. Tap, tap. Princess Pulverizer tap, tap, hopped her way over to the window for a better look at the 2 boys who were fencing. One of them was actually pretty good. He moved his feet quickly and was able to block most of the jabs that came from his opponent. From Princess Pulverizer's point of view, fencing didn't look that hard. All you had to do was dance around a little and poke at someone with a sword. A few lunges here, a few steps backward there, a poke, a jab, and maybe a twirl, just to make it look fancy. What was the big deal about fencing anyway? Lunge, step, poke, jab, twirl, oomph. Whoa! Princess Pulverizer exclaimed as she bashed into one of the girls in her class, who then crashed into the girl on her left, who knocked down the 2 girls on either side of her, who both collapsed right on top of Lady Frump. Princess Serena! Lady Frump shouted angrily as she climbed out from under the pile of crowns, shoes, petticoats, arms, and legs. What am I going to do with you? Princess Pulverizer looked down at the purple pudding stain on her dress. She stared at the wiggling mountain of classmates on the ground. And for once, the princess had no answer for Lady Frump. And that's the first chapter of Princess Pulverizer. So I hope you guys had a good time with that. I was wondering if you had any questions for me, which you do. K.A. Serena is asking, how did you come up with the name Princess Pulverizer? Well, I really like alliteration, which is when the words start with similar sounds. Katie Kazoo, for instance. Also, pulverize is the perfect word for this kind of princess. She is not dainty, she is not sweet, and she is more likely to pounce on her enemies than to charm them. So that's where that came from. So I'm asking, why was it important to write a book about a princess who would rather be a knight? Well, I feel like there are a lot of girls out there that aren't frilly. I certainly was not. I was not the tiara type. I didn't walk around with a pillowcase on my head pretending to be a bride. And I've always felt that we shouldn't pigeonhole people. And also, I think girls can do anything boys can do. Boys can do anything girls can do. Anyone who sets their mind to anything should be allowed to try. My favorite character to write was probably, up till recently, I would say is definitely Princess Pulverizer. I've written a lot of fun characters. I like characters that are not perfect. I like them when they've got a bit of an edge. George Brown, Class Clown, is another one of my characters. George has a magical super burp that makes him do terrible things, but he's really a good person at heart. So it's a lot of fun to write a kid that sort of misbehaves, but is a good person at heart. It's also fun to write the bad guys. Writing bad guys is great because as an author, I create a whole universe that I control. So the bad guys never win, they always lose, and they always get theirs in the end. But in the meantime, it's really fun to write them. Do I miss writing about Katie Kazoo and George Brown? I do and I don't. I become very close friends with my characters, at least in my head. So it takes me a while to say goodbye to them like you would to any good friend. But certainly in the case of Katie Kazoo, there were 46 books in that series, 35 regular books, 11 super specials. So for me, I had pretty much told Katie's story as much as I could. I don't ever want a series that I'm writing to become boring. I would much rather go out on top when they're still fun to write and hopefully still fun to read. George Brown, there were 20-something books in that series. So similarly, I had told all the stories that I possibly could. But every now and then I'll go back and read them. And that's fun too, because I don't always remember the whole story or every little thing I had written. So there's fun in that too. Hi, Becca. Did I write a lot of stories as a child? I did. And in fact, I used to write a lot of them, and my father would then print them out for me. At work, he would print them out and staple them shut, and then I would get to sort of sell them to my relatives. I would sell books of my stories to my relatives, and I don't know why my parents allowed me to do that, but they did. So I guess you could say I published and sold my first books when I was like in first grade, but I've always liked to write, and I've always kept journals. Journals are very important to authors because that's where all your ideas come from. So for me, that writing, constant writing is really, really important. I find that I am miserable when I'm not writing. It's such a release for me, and these characters are so real for me. Actually, George and Katie are a crossover. Katie Kazoo and George Brown are related in that George was a character in the Katie Kazoo books, and he left and moved away. George moved away quite a bit because his father was in the military and he traveled a lot. So there was some crossover of characters in those books. It works within the universe when the characters have already known each other. It would not work with, say, Princess Pulverizer and George Brown, because Princess Pulverizer takes place somewhere between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period, and George Brown is taking place now. So crossovers only work when they're possible. Have I ever thought of writing an adult book? Nope, never had a desire to write an adult book. I personally don't find adults particularly interesting. I think kids are much more fascinating and much more fun. And I get to laugh a lot when I'm writing as a kid in my head. So I have never considered writing an adult book, and I can't imagine that I would. Anyone else have a question? My favorite book I have ever read. Well, when I was a kid, I loved mysteries, so I read a lot of Nancy Drew. I read some Hardy Boys. I loved a series called All of Kind Family, which was also a wonderful series. As I got older, I think probably one of my favorite books, and you'll probably read it in high school, would be The Great Gatsby. I'll read anything by F. Scott Fitzgerald or Ernest Hemingway. Those are my favorite. I would say those are my two favorite adult authors. Also, as a kid, I read everything I could by Judy Blume. And I know there's probably a lot of Judy Blume fans out there right now. Is it easier to write a series than a standalone book? I honestly have not written many standalone books. I wrote a few teen romance novels. I find writing a series, I don't know if it's easier to write a series than a standalone, but it is certainly more fun and more fulfilling to write a series because the character development can take place slowly over time. The Princess Pulverizer series, for instance, it only has 8 books. It was always planned that way. And I was able to plan it out because what happens is in order to become a knight, Princess Pulverizer has to learn much better behavior. She cannot be self-centered. She cannot be bossy. She needs to learn to be respectful. And so over the course of 8 books, I was able to give the character that arc and allow her to grow. I think when you have the ability to do that with a series, it's much more fun and much more fulfilling. Also, in some ways it's easier because after the first book, you get to know the characters better. In a single title, you don't get that opportunity. The question is, has COVID been an inspirational time to create new stories? It absolutely has for me. I'm actually working on 2 new series right now as we speak, which I really can't say much about because they haven't been officially announced. But I have written 3 new books that have been approved, and I'm working on a 4th one. For me, the COVID experience was a little different than it was for most people. I have always worked at home. I have always worked by myself. Well, unless you count the dog or the characters in my head, in which case I have plenty of company. So COVID didn't necessarily change the way that I work. There was a certain amount of anxiety, particularly here in New York City, where we had a big problem with it early on. But in general, I have been very creative, and I think it's actually a really good time to take an opportunity to try something you've always wanted to. Maybe go online and take music lessons, or painting lessons, or write a book, or make up a video game, learn coding. This can be a very big opportunity if we just open up our minds and accept. For me, the question is, how long does it take to write a book? Well, the first book in the series, as I said, is always the most difficult. You don't know the characters, they haven't become real, and you have to really work out not only the premise of the book, but the premise of the series in your head. So for me, usually I start with an outline, and I work from an outline, and I do what's called a first draft. And the first draft usually takes me about 3 weeks on a new series. And I usually will go through that first draft and change it and work it and maybe add a character, subtract a character, move things around. Around the 3rd or 4th week, I'll send it to my editor who will read it over. And sometimes she'll say things to me like, "This is the funniest thing I ever read. I was reading it on the subway and I was laughing so hard, everyone on the train moved away from me because they thought I was crazy." And I love when she says things like that. But sometimes she says things like, "I don't know what you were thinking. I really don't. You need to come up with some changes. You need to revise." And very often the revising will take a good 2 weeks. And I may have to do it several times until the editor and I agree that the book is ready to go. And then finally, my last version will be about 6 weeks in, and then it goes to the illustrator. But that's for the first book. By the time you get to the 5th or 6th book, that can all be done in about a month. So it does differ the more you get to know the characters. Patty is asking me, where do I get my inspiration? Well, I can get my inspiration from all kinds of places. For instance, George Brown, the class clown, the boy who has a magical super burp that gets him in a lot of trouble, was based on my son, Ian, who was so bad I was on speed dial from the headmaster, and he spent 8th grade basically in the hall. He could burp the alphabet. And at one point he said to me, I don't know, I try to be good, but it just like sort of bursts out of me. I can't sit there all day. And that's where that idea came from. There was another time, I remember I was at the hairdresser and I saw a woman with the worst haircut I've ever seen in my entire life. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I hope they can fix that because that looks like Katie Kazoo cut her hair. And that became a book called Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. I tend to carry my journals everywhere and I write ideas in the journal. Katie Kazoo herself came from a dream I had about a girl who turned into a hamster. And I had a dream journal next to my bed and I wrote girl into hamster. And that's how that happened. Princess Pulverizer was slightly different. I was asked by an editor to come up with a series about a dragon. But the more I wrote about Princess Pulverizer's friend Dribble, I discovered that he's a great secondary character, but Princess Pulverizer was where my heart was and who I wanted to speak through. And that's how that happened. Have I tried any new skills or hobbies during the pandemic? I've been writing a lot, but I have started with a bunch of friends. We call it the 10,000 Step Club. Our gym has been closed. I love to work out. So my friends and I tend to get in at least 10,000 steps. At the end of the day, we compare how many steps we've gotten in. We've gone way past 10 now. Our average now is somewhere between 13,000 and 15,000. So that's kind of new for me and kind of fun. I'm not usually competitive, but we've become very competitive about our steps. At some point, I'll probably wind up writing a character who loves to walk all over the place. You do certainly see a lot of New York City when you're trying to get in what is essentially 5 miles every day. So that's been interesting. I also have been reading a tremendous number of books, I would say that in a normal year, I would probably read 20 books a year, maybe, because often when I'm writing, I don't read books. I may read newspapers and things, but I don't read books because I'm trying not to pick up voices of other characters. So I usually read a book in between writing a book. But during this pandemic, I would say I've read at least 20 books since March. I usually read adult books for grown-ups. Very rarely will read other people's kid books, again, because I don't like to pick up other people's ideas or subconsciously, and I don't like to pick up the voices, but I do have a lot of friends who are authors, and very often I want to support them, so I will purchase their books and I will read those as well. If I could tell my younger writing self anything, what would it be? I would probably tell my younger writing self that I'd better learn to embrace the revising process. As a kid, I never wanted to rewrite. I never wanted to redo. I never wanted to change. I always thought everything I wrote was exactly as it should be. And what I have learned from working with professional, wonderful editors at some of the best publishing houses in the country is that every author needs to revise. Every author needs to rewrite. And having someone else who tells you, you should do this, but not that, it's helpful. It's helpful because what may make sense in your brain may not make sense to somebody else. Also, other people have great ideas that you can then mold to add to your character. So I think I would tell my younger self to have a little less ego and learn to embrace revising. I have changed books in so many ways for the better, I can't even begin to tell you. How many hours a day do I write? Well, it depends on the day. Usually my schedule is I get up at about 8. I'll go out for my first walk of the day with the dog or without, depending on her mood. And then I will write from about 9 to 12. I'll have some lunch. I'll go out for another short walk. I'll come back and I will probably, unless I'm doing something like this, I'll write again until 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And then, I don't know, wander around Manhattan for a while, I guess. What do I say to reluctant readers to encourage them to read? I don't think there are any really reluctant readers. I just think there are kids that haven't found the right book yet. There is a book for everyone. There is a book that will flip that switch and make you want to read. You just have to look for it. You have to look for a book that's about something or someone you might find interesting. I suggest definitely reading, maybe when you're in the bookstore, read the first couple of pages. Make sure it's something you understand. It's something that makes you smile or makes you think. But I would definitely read the beginning of a book. Also, ask a librarian. Tell a librarian what you're interested in, what you find fun. Tell a librarian what you don't seem to like about reading, and I will guarantee that she or he will be able to find you a book that will flip that switch and make you a reader. What is my favorite place in New York City? Well, it used to be the Beacon Theater, which is right near my house. It's a small theater where they have a lot of rock concerts, and I spent a lot of time before the pandemic going to rock concerts. That's probably what I miss the most, is the live music. So I would say that was one of my favorite places. I also love to walk. I don't live far from the Hudson River, so I like to walk to the river and then walk along the path near the river. That's beautiful. And I don't live far from Central Park, and Central Park is a really magical place. Sam is asking, do you know you are going to have a sequel before you finish the first book? Well, very often when I have a series that I want to write, I have to do what's called a proposal. And that's when I write up what I want the series to be about, who the main characters will be, and basically I have to give a plot or what the story will be for the first 4 books of the series. So when you write series, every author has to do that. Editors like to see that this is a concept and characters that can be spread over the course of several books. So I always know from the beginning, at least what the first 4 books are going to be about. Thanks, Sam. How many unpublished and half-finished books do I have? Not that many. Because I do things as a proposal, I will know ahead of time whether or not those books will be published. If I can't find an editor for the proposal, I move on to create something else because, but I've been very, very blessed and very, very lucky that I tend not to have to start things ahead of time. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people who have written half books and unfinished books and finally finished them during this pandemic and are now beginning to send them out. So, and hopefully get them published. So I don't happen to have a lot of unpublished and half-finished books, but I know a lot of people who do, and that is how other people work.
Hi, Nancy. It's
Hi.
Eileen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm back on. Amy had to go do something, but I'm live in the warehouse, the Book Fairies warehouse. If everybody can see, we have tons of books to give away.
Woohoo!
Woo! I couldn't help but think how you were saying how during COVID you found you're reading more books, and all I could think of is, can you imagine a home without a book? And that's really what we're all about.
No, not at all. And that's just one of many bookshelves.
Exactly, but can you imagine not having them? And that's really what our mission is all about. We're about finding those homes that don't have books, finding those kids that don't have access to books, and really removing access to books is a barrier to achieving literacy. And we can't thank you enough for being here today, sharing your talent.
Thank you for having me.
You were so entertaining. The books are adorable, and they are very funny, by the way. And we're so grateful. And for everybody that's watching, we appreciate all of your support with all of the authors and the celebrities that are coming on. And we hope that we'll find you every day. We're sending out notices. 3 p.m. is the normal time. There are some aberrations, but 3 p.m. Be there or be square with your Book Fairies. And thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we hope to see you next year as well.
You know where I'll be.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate
Bye-bye. Happy reading. Happy writing.